What's up, everybody? Thanks for hanging out with us on this Tuesday. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. I'll remind everybody the good thing about a Saturday game is it's one less day of build-up. We get to it a little bit quicker, even though it may not be the time that we're all thrilled about. The bottom line is Eagles Saturday night against the Giants. And joining us right now from Heavy on Sports, NFL reporter, the one and only Matt Lombardo. Lombo, what's up, my man?
Hey, boys. Thanks for having me back.
What's going on, man? Come on, man. I appreciate you coming back, man. I mean, you cover both of these teams, individually, man. So we had to have you on.
Yeah, you know what? I almost feel like I'm the president at halftime of the Army-Navy game, right? You know, you've covered both of these teams, spent time on the beat. I have to almost like walk one sideline to the other at halftime. It should be a fun night down at the link. And, you know, just a turnaround in the NFC East this year when you think about it. Kind of the laughingstock, the NFC released a year ago. And now you'll get the NFC wildcard weekend. 3 of the teams from the division made it to the divisional round. So a really fascinating turnaround that I think really, in terms of the Giants, one of the bigger turnarounds that we've seen in recent history. When you look at how they got here, the players on that roster and the job that Brian Daboll has done, arguably, in my opinion, cementing his status as the coach of the year. Saturday night should be a real fun one.
Yeah, Lombo, that's the thing, man. I mean, I don't know if people remember what a disaster they were under Joe Judge. And I will say the roster isn't that drastically different. I know Saquon's healthier and there are other factors involved here, but it's not like they went crazy in the offseason bringing in different pieces. They really didn't. He's doing this essentially with very similar personnel.
No, I agree. And I'd argue significantly worse personnel at wide receiver. When you look at the regression of Kenny Golladay and the limited role, I mean, they're trotting out guys named Richie James and Isaiah Hodgins. And Hodgins, a waiver wire pickup from the Bills, suddenly has turned into a fringe star who I'd argue is probably entering this season as a fringe NFL player. And to me, that really speaks to the job that Mike Kafka, former Eagles backup quarterback, has done as offensive coordinator. And rightfully so. He's drawing a lot of interest in terms of a potential head coaching hire this hiring cycle. And I look at what they've been able to do with Hodgins and James and really developing that offensive line. You know, Daniel Jones has gone from being a guy who the Giants in April on draft day declined his 5th-year option to you look up in the middle of January, and he's legitimately a top 15 or better quarterback in this league with, as I said, fringe NFL talent at wide receiver. Saquon Barkley is back. The offensive line is playing really well despite being banged up at times this year. I just look at what they've done, and to me, it's a testament to coaching and scheme more so than talent, because I think they've gotten a lot out of mediocre talent in this scheme. And you look at the cap space they have going into this offseason, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with, I think, in years to come with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll kind of in alignment in terms of vision and having the resources to build out that roster. But, Rob, you're right. They didn't really do a lot to improve the roster. They just built a coaching staff that's developed the talent at a really high level really quickly.
Matt, here's one name they did bring in and change the roster, and I mentioned it yesterday. I think it's one of the best rag the richest stories in the NFL this year. This kid Isaiah Hodgins. Now he's drafted by Buffalo. He's an afterthought for 2 seasons there. They finally give up on him. You know, Daboll picks this kid up off the waivers this year, and he comes in and like Darius Slayton said, "Hey, I didn't know who this guy was. You know, nobody had ever heard of him." And all of a sudden, he becomes a viable entity in the passing game in his offense to where he has 5 touchdown catches in six games. Can you explain to me how he has risen so quickly? He's only been there for 8 games, and yet he's one of Daniel Jones' go-to guys now.
Yeah, Gunnar, I think it's a couple of things. And Brian Daboll made the comment in Peter King's column yesterday that he was a guy that you talked to Joe Schoen, these guys obviously coming from the same background in Buffalo. They've built an offense, you know, with similar terminology to what the Bills deploy. So it was obviously a soft landing spot. You're not looking at a depth chart where you're trying to overcome Stephon Diggs and Isaiah McKenzie and all of these weapons in Buffalo. He kind of falls into East Rutherford where he's the guy, right? I mean, Kenny Golladay, an afterthought. Sterling Shepard banged up, not on the field. And who else do you go to? Richie James? I mean, Daniel Bellinger, the rising tight end. He had the opportunity here with a quarterback who they've done a really nice job of kind of, you know, preaching to him, protecting the football and taking your shots when they're there. Hodgins, I think, has created a lot of shots because he had the opportunity to get on the field immediately, and there wasn't that competition for reps, and there was the familiarity with the scheme, and I think that's a dangerous combo for a young player.
When you look at Wink Martindale, I'm gonna go to the other side of the ball with Wink Martindale and the guys that he has there, Ojulari. You got Dexter Lawrence playing at he's all pro, he's playing all pro level. And the mixture of adding, Kayvon Thibodeau, what makes this defense with the blitz package, they tend not to blitz a little bit less this last game against Minnesota. Do you think they have kind of the same game plan going to this because Jalen Hurts has kind of picked up their blitz and understands their blitz and can hurt them in a blitz?
Yeah, I think they don't really have to blitz as much, Barrett. When you look at the interior rush that you get from Dexter Lawrence, you look coming off the edge, a guy like Leonard Williams, who had a really nice game the other day in Minnesota. If you don't have to blitz and you can drop your guys in coverage, I think that takes away the middle of the field a little bit, which is where the Eagles have liked to feast in the underneath game to Dallas Goedert and to the backside of the backfield. I don't think they're going to have to blitz as much, and I certainly don't think that you want to against Jalen Hurts because, as you alluded to, he's kind of in that Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes realm of if you can't pressure him without blitzing, it's going to be a long night because he's going to pick you apart if you don't get home.
Lombo, I'm going to go back to the offense and just, we all sort of wrote Daniel Jones off. So did the Giants not picking up his option, frankly. Right. They didn't have the belief. Is this just simply putting in a better system for him? Is it a running back you can count on? Is it Brian Dable just instilling the confidence in him? What's made him look like the guy that Dave Gettleman drafted as high as he did?
Yeah, I think, Rob, it comes down to them not really asking him to do too much, right? They're not asking him to put the ball into harm's way all that often. They've realized that he's a threat with his legs as well as with his arms. So they've kind of crafted this scheme where it's a lot of RPO. It's a lot of, read option type of schematics. They lean on the running back with Saquon Barkley, who's fully healthy, more explosive than I think he's ever been. I tweeted it during the game on Sunday. I think that if Dave Gettleman were, half the roster builder that Joe Shane has been, that pick number 2 overall in 2018 would have looked a lot different because this is the back the Giants thought that they were getting. And again, I think they need to really revamp that wide receiving core. But as far as Daniel Jones goes specifically, I think it really just comes down to they've built a scheme around his strengths. He's figured out a way to protect the football, only 5 interceptions this year. But let's not go crazy and hog wild about his production. Only had 15 touchdowns. So it's not like they're, beating teams dramatically through the air. They've done enough by not giving other teams extra opportunities via the turnovers. They've ran the ball down your throats all year with Saquon Barkley. And Daniel Jones has become basically the conductor of that offense. It's worked really well for them. And I'll be fascinated to see what they look like next year, assuming they go out and they build out that wide receiving core and give him some top-tier receivers. I'll be interested to see that combination of protecting the football and confidence, what that does for Jones and the offense moving forward in 2023 and beyond.
All right, well, Matt, since Rob said he's going back to the offense, I'm going back to the defense. All right, how much does having back and forth? How much does having Adoree Jackson and Xavier McKinney back in that defense change the way what's his name?
Wink Martindale.
Wingdale change the way he calls a game?
I think it changes a lot, right? And I think that you saw that stretch of 2 or 3 games where McKinney was out and they were kind of vulnerable, especially the game against the Seahawks without him out there. I think that McKinney is probably one of their 2 best defenders. And Adoree Jackson, you saw what he did against Justin Jefferson. He was really a non-factor for much of that game on Sunday afternoon. And I really think that when you look at what Adoree has done, according to PFF, his passer rating allowed to something like 80.7, just a really solid lockdown cornerback, lockdown year for him. And if they're able to replicate that against A.J. Brown and have Adoree travel with A.J. Brown as he did with Justin Jefferson, I think it's going to be really one of the more interesting matchups to watch on Sunday night. But I think that those 2 guys being healthy and playing at a high level, it changes everything for that defense. It really does. In the same way that having Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back there for the Eagles,
absolutely,
there was a spell for 2 or 3 games where you looked up at the box score and you saw a little bit of regression from James Bradbury and Darius Slay because Gardner-Johnson wasn't back there. All of a sudden, he comes back against the Giants, and I know it's against their backups, but they looked like they just had a more confident secondary. They played at a higher level, and I think that's sort of what you're seeing from the Giants with McKinney and Jackson being back out there.
Looking, player for player, we see this Eagles team as a team that, on paper, they look better than this, the Giants team, and understanding that how much, how do you really rely? Do they really think that they can beat this Eagles team? I mean, are they really ready to take the full onslaught of healthy Lane Johnson, Jalen Hurts going into this game? To me, it's kind of iffy as far as what type of game we're really going to see. Because so everybody else, it's an easy win. I'm not necessarily seeing it that way.
Yeah, Barrett, I don't think this is an easy win for either side. I don't think that either one of these teams should go in there thinking that it's going to be easy. Look, I said it on my podcast last week. This all hinges on Jalen Hurts for the Eagles. Everything for the Eagles and their trajectory in this postseason run hinges on Jalen Hurts being fully healthy and fully effective, because he clearly wasn't 2 weeks ago, even against the Giants backups. They went into that game basically saying, you are not going to take a hit today. You're going to throw it away. If you scramble, you're going to scramble out of bounds. If that's the Jalen Hurts that the Giants see on Saturday night, they have a puncher's chance here, because they don't turn the football over. They are able to control the game via the run. Their defense is playing at a really high level, as we saw in Minnesota. But if Jalen Hurts is back to his MVP form and they're able to spring A.J. Brown for a couple of big plays down the field, if they're able to control the tempo with Miles Sanders and get Dallas Goedert involved, and if Lane Johnson is healthy and they keep Jalen Hurts upright, then yeah, I think the Eagles are rightfully about a 6 or 7 point favorite. But I think this game is going to be a lot closer than people think, because I don't know that Jalen Hurts is 100% healthy. I don't know that he's going to be the same quarterback that he was in weeks 6, 7, or 8. And the Eagles are going to need him to be, not only against the Giants, but assuming they get by on Saturday night against San Francisco or Dallas or whoever it winds up being in the championship game next week, if they make it that far.
I think it's going to be close to Lombo. I know the spread's up to 7.5. I think that's – I wouldn't touch it, but if I was leaning, I'd grab the 7.5. That's just me. Let's go back to a point you were just making. You can't really take much from that last game, where the last regular season game, where the Eagles are trying to not get guys hurt, but kind of win the game. Giants aren't playing anybody. It's a wash. Do you take much from the earlier game? It wasn't that far back. It was week 14. It was about a month and change ago, where the Eagles, was pretty handily 48-22 win.
Yeah, I think that's the formula, right? I mean, they rushed for 295 yards or something ridiculous in that game. But again, Jalen Hurts was fully effective and fully mobile. I think that the big key for the Eagles is figuring out a way to get the ball into the red zone and let Jalen Hurts do his thing. It's something like 20 red zone touchdowns this year between rushing and passing, really effective inside the 20. And I think that's where he's at his best. If you can establish the run and keep the Giants off the field, and you can dictate to that defense and shorten the game, that's going to get you by. But again, I'm not writing off the Giants, especially after the defensive effort that they had against the Vikings on Sunday.
Man, here's what I've said, and I don't write off anybody at this stage, because I think the first round of the playoffs has been exactly a replica of what this entire season has been. Unpredictable at its finest. And I've said this time and time again throughout the latter course of the season, that we've seen more unpredictable outcomes than I can remember in any time in recent year. And if you're still standing in the playoff, you always have a puncher's chance. You look at the way the Jacksonville game turned itself out. You look what turned around that Baltimore game, a fluke play. I look at this Giants team similar to some teams that we've seen in the past, and I brought it up to Barrett yesterday, where number 6 seeds were thought to be just a practice game, and all of a sudden they shocked the world. Now, the Giants go into Minnesota, they beat the 3 seed. That's got to build confidence for them. They know this Eagles team inside and out. And that's why when you said it before, and I think that's confirmation to me. I think on paper, I think we all agree the Eagles have the superior talent in overall team structure. But when that ball hits the ground and you line up across from each other, any and everything could possibly happen.
There's something about momentum, right? And I think you saw that in Jacksonville on Saturday night. And, talking to people inside the league going into last week, the feeling was the Jaguars were one of those teams that could really make a run, because they're healthy, because they're playing dominant defense, they're creating turnovers, and they went out and they did that, especially in the second half against the Chargers. To a lesser extent, I think the Giants are kind of in that same vein, right? I don't think they finished the season all that well, other than maybe waxing a half-checked-out Colts team to clinch a playoff berth in East Rutherford, but they're healthy, and that matters this time of year. And the Eagles, I don't know how healthy they really are, and I think that we're going to find out on Sunday night just how healthy and effective Lane Johnson and Jalen Hurts are. That's going to determine a lot for the Eagles. But I'm with you, Gunnar. I think that when you get to this point in the playoffs, if you're still standing, you got a real puncher's chance.
Yeah.
Let me ask you. Let's go on to the NFC. This matchup, Dallas 49ers, might be the matchup for the of the whole weekend. What are you looking at as far as that?
Well, Bills Bengals is going to give that a run for their money as the matchup of the weekend. I mean, look,
Yeah.
those are two really great games. Those are the two games I'm looking forward to the most. But I look at what you saw last night. Dak Prescott really answered all the critics, in terms of coming up small in the postseason.
Yes.
Maybe the finest performance of his career. You look at Micah Parsons, 2 tackles for loss, 9 pressures. They didn't even blitz all that much because they didn't have to, except for him flying all over the field into the backfield. I mean, to me, I think the 49ers are one of those teams that, even though they've kind of said it and forgot it at quarterback, that they can kind of go autopilot with Brock Purdy, they beat you in so many ways. They create turnovers. Going into the postseason in their final 5 games of the year, they held opponents to 13.5 points per game. That's less than 2 touchdowns per game. Really tough to beat defensively. D'Amico Ryans is going to be a head coach. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But they're so hard to contain offensively. They beat you with Deebo Samuel through the air, on the ground. Christian McCaffrey, same thing. Then you got to worry about George Kittle over the middle. And, by the way, there's Brandon Ayuk, one of the more underrated receivers in the league.
Right.
I think the 49ers are the most complete team remaining in the postseason, certainly the most complete team in the NFC. And I think they're going to be a handful. If the Eagles get past the Giants on Saturday night, they're going to be a handful in that championship game. And I think Dallas has a chance because of how prolific their offense is. But I think the Niners are just too balanced and too talented on both sides of the ball. I just don't see the Cowboys capturing that lightning in a bottle twice, especially when you look at who they did it against on Monday night, a really depleted Buccaneers team with Tom Brady playing arguably, I think, one of the worst games of his entire career.
Yeah, and not only was he stunk, they were lifeless. There was no adjustments made. I mean, it just went to show everything we talked about all year. That team had no business being in the playoffs, Matt, let alone hosting a game.
No, I agree. And, I think that, all the talk about Tom Brady potentially going to the Raiders, listen, I think retirement is legitimately on the table for him, as it should be. I mean, this wasn't Michael Jordan crossing over Byron Russell for the game winner in 1996. This was Michael Jordan hanging on in Philadelphia, scoring 15 points in 28 minutes at age 40. That's what we saw from Tom Brady.
Yeah.
As a wizard. That's what we saw from Tom Brady on Monday night. Now, he might come back rejuvenated as ever and as motivated as ever to play to 50 years old. But I think retirement has to be on the table, because you look at the interception to J-Ron Curse, guys, it was clear. Terrible. He got rid of that football because he didn't want to get hit. He's trying to avoid contact at all costs. And that's not how you win at the quarterback position. And that's not how you can be effective at that position either. And again, I think the Cowboys played well. I think that there were enough big plays on both sides of the ball to kind of legitimize them and what they are going into the divisional round. But the Buccaneers have some serious questions to answer, not just about Tom Brady, but about the direction of that offense moving forward from here.
Love it, man. This is what it's all about, man. Playing in January, going into February. I like our odds, but if you look at the AFC team, I don't know if Doug has a really good opportunity against Big Red, his former coach,
They're going to win that game.
Whoa.
They're going to win that game. And they're 8.5-point dogs. I think bare minimum they cover. I think they have a chance of winning outright. Listen, I look at the way that defense is playing right now. Yeah, I think of the way that you look at Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, the way they're playing off the edge, and just the way that they changed the course of that game in the second half. They're not a fluke. This has been a month and a half of them just strangling teams defensively. And I know it's a tough environment. I know you have to play a perfect game for 60 minutes against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But Mahomes is one of these guys where for every 3 or 4 spectacular plays, he'll throw the ball into harm's way for a costly interception at a bad time. That's how the Bengals have beaten them 3 times in a row. And again, I think the Jaguars have a real chance here of pulling off the upside of the playoffs.
You give him a gem, and then all of a sudden, bam! Look what he gives us. So just ask the question. Wow, that's saying a lot, man. Because you look at Lawrence. Lawrence is playing at a high level. In the second half, he was playing at a high level, but he's done. Doug has pulled out of him dual threat type of capabilities. I think that's really helped his game as a quarterback.
Well, yeah, and you have a supporting cast with Travis Etienne, who's a really nice back. I think he's really underrated. And Christian Kirk, everybody mocked that deal when the Jaguars, backed up the Brinks truck back in March. You talk to people inside the league, Kirk is an ascending talent at wide receiver, and he showed you that this year. You look at Zay Jones having a nice game. They finally
Marvin Jones,
Marvin Jones. They've finally gotten a lot out of Evan Ingram. I think that what you saw on Saturday night is what the Giants hoped that they were getting and thought he always had the potential to be. But I think this all comes down to coaching. And again, Andy Reid is one of the best to ever do it. But Doug Peterson has proven that the apple doesn't fall far from that tree. He has the Jaguars believing. He clearly got them bought in the second half, and they built up a nice scheme that utilizes the best of Trevor Lawrence and involves the tight end and Evan Ingram the same way the Eagles have over the years with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. This is a really, plucky, really dangerous Jaguars team, and I think that the rest of the country is kind of sleeping on them a little bit.
I want to get it back to the Eagles, as somebody once said, Matt.
We've heard that a time or two.
Yes, we have. And Jonathan Gannon. And I don't want to prejudice anything by asking the question, but I'm just curious what you think of him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the criticism is kind of unfair and unwarranted. I mean, I know the opener against the Lions, they really struggled, and the loss to the Commanders, it seemed like he kind of didn't have a great game plan out there. But look, I think the Eagles on defense, I think they've been solid. I think they've been, an upper tier defense this year. They're one of the two teams in the NFC with a top 10 offense and top 10 defense still playing. To me, that's a credit to Jonathan Gannon. I think that, this year, people might have a bad taste in their mouth because of what the Eagles were last year defensively, but they finally bring in his type of players, Hassan Reddick, Kazir White. They bring in the defensive backs, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, James Bradbury, guys that really thrive in that type of a scheme. And I thought he's done really well. And you talk to people inside the league, the Eagles coordinators are as respected as anybody in terms of potential head coaching hires. So I think that, losing Jonathan Gannon might be a bigger loss to them than some Eagles fans might want to give credit for.
You know what, Matt? If not this year, then in the immediate future, who do you think becomes a head coach first? Would it be Gannon or Steichen?
I think it's Steichen. I think anytime that you can take a quarterback like Jalen Hurts in a second year in his system and turn him into this. I mean, I watched Jalen Hurts, and I think he's a more mobile Peyton Manning. I think he's that good pre-snap. I think he's that good at looking off safeties and dictating to a defense. And a lot of that, again, all the credit in the world to Jalen Hurts. Obviously, he has one of the best work ethics that you've seen around here in quite some time, a drive to be better and the talent to be better. But I think a lot of that comes down to coaching as well, and the improvements that you see week to week, game to game. I think a lot of that comes down to Steichen. And, outside of the Saints game with the play calling where you kind of scratched your head, especially early with Gardner Minshew in there and kind of getting away from the running game as dramatically as they did. As a play caller, I think he's been pretty flawless most of the year. So I think that, Steichen is the guy who's probably going to get the head coaching job first. I think he's really well regarded inside the league. And you look at all these teams, guys, it's a lot harder as a defensive coordinator to get a head coaching job today because the game is so tilted to the offensive side and there's such an emphasis on dynamic quarterback play. That's what I think is going to make Steichen a really marketable candidate moving forward.
Matt, coaching matchup advantage in the Eagles-Giants game, Sirianni and his staff versus Dable and their staff.
Boy, I think that's really evenly matched. I mean, listen, I love what the Eagles have done this year, especially, with Jalen Hurts' development and what you've seen from that offense. But it's hard for me to go against Brian Dable. It's hard for me to go against a staff that has gotten this much out of so little in New York on both sides of the football. And again, there's a couple nice players on both sides of the ball, but I think that what they've been able to do week in and week out in New York has been pretty impressive. So I give a really slight edge to the Giants.
Okay. Interesting, man. No, it's going to be fun.
It
is going to be fun. That's for sure. Matt, listen, man, always great catching up with you. And, just hopefully we'll be able to keep this thing rolling if the Eagles are able to take care of their business. So ultimately, who wins the game in your estimation?
I think the Eagles are talented enough to get by. I think it's a lot closer than people think. I could see this thing being like a 23-20, 21-17 type of a game. But I think it comes down to the fourth quarter. I think it's a one-score game late, and the Eagles' talent just rises to the occasion.
Okay. Wow. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Lombardo NFL, and of course at Heavy on Sports, senior NFL reporter. Matt, we do appreciate your time, man. Thank you very much for
appreciate you, bro. Yeah,
Big
man.
Red Jim, Big Red Doug.
Thanks, Matt. Take care, man. Good stuff there. He thinks it's a tight one. How about the prediction on the Jags?
That's what I'm saying.
Upsetting Big Red.
Jim there.
Man.
Wow.
Hey, people like to go out on a limb every now and then,
All right. Yeah, I like it.
But you know what? I mean, when you really look at it, man, the way their defense is playing and the lack of I'm not going to say lack of defense because the Chiefs, they got Jones in there. They got a couple players. They got Bolton, the linebackers in there. But other than that, man, they really don't have a lot on the defensive side of the ball that you would be able to stop Lawrence and the rest of that offense. So if they could go score for score with Big Red, man, it might be a tight game because that defense can definitely put some pressure on Patrick Mahomes.
No question. All right, let me give you a little update.
The thing is, can they get him to the ground, though?
That's
Patrick Mahomes is a wizard. Pure wedding, underhand, flipping over the top. That dude does stuff I've never seen in the 4 decades plus I've covered the NFL. And Absolutely. He keeps doing it, keeps adding something new to his repertoire.
One of the few, it was maybe the only bright spot last night. Brady made a little Mahomes play early. Did you guys see that one when he was scrambling, did the little flip move? That's what I'm thinking. All right, maybe there's some life, and then quickly you realize there was no life in that. But a little update here. So Nick Sirianni meeting with the media as we speak. He said that Jalen Hurts is better than he was 2 weeks ago, continues to improve, and after holding him back in practice last Thursday, he'll throw fully today. So there's no restrictions on his throwing, at least at practice today. So yeah, little incremental good signs there, right? All right, so we get a timeout here. We will come back. Guys, we'll dig a little bit more into the NFL. There's a ton of NFL news that we're going to do. David Murphy's going to join us at 2 o'clock, but we'll do some NFL stuff when we come back, and we'll dive right back into the birds with David as well. All right, he is Derek Gunn. He's Barrett Brooks. I'm Rob Ellis. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Let's talk about Pro Action Restoration. Yeah, Pro Action Restoration. So here's the deal. If you have a home, you have a business, property that you may own, if you've gone through water, fire, smoke, mold damage, any of those kind of issues, and you can't clean it up, you don't know what to do, well, they're the people that you call on. Pro Action Restoration is on call 24 hours, 7 days a week to assist. I can attest to this. I had a problem on a Saturday. They came right out to my parents' house. They cleaned it up. The crew was unbelievable, and it was just a massive relief. A massive relief. All right, they are licensed, bonded, fully insured. They've been serving the tri-state area for more than 2 decades. Pro Action Restoration will work in conjunction with your insurance company. So again, water, fire, smoke damage, mold remediation, you name it, they can handle it. Give them a call, 610-623-3760, 610-623-3760, or online at proactionrestoration.com. That's proactionrestoration.com.